Community Services section of the Coordinating Committee. Agenda items 3:1, deputations, petitions, presentations, and public meetings. None. Unfinished business. Signed bylaw. Item 3.3, other agency reports. Fire Department monthly report. Mr. Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chief. Before we start, I'm seeking council's permission to beat up Kelly for wearing a Boston jersey.
Oh.
I'll let you think about that.
Oh.
Oh, and we will be posting for new AA a little later.
You need a
What's your sleeve in this then?
good.
Sorry.
Okay, Andre, are you okay? Everything good?
Go ahead.
So month of March, we responded to 120 calls for service. Nothing overly notable. However, this past Monday, as everyone was aware, we had a major gas leak on River Road West, which closed the road for 12 hours. So creating a bit of a challenge now between Public Works and OPP, Fire, and a few other agencies. We managed to reroute traffic around and didn't hear too many complaints. There's always going to be a few, but it was main artery and there was no other way around, so we had to utilize Mosley Street. And like I said, I didn't hear too much, whether council did or not. I'm not sure. But I did want to note in the report I said that the deputy was had a joint presentation for the Simcoe Muskoka Family Connection caseworkers. He was out on an inspection with CAS and found a home with no smoke alarms, and through further discussions with that agency, they said, you know, what can we do to help? And so the deputy got together Collingwood and Clearview and had a meeting with through the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit with those partners, and kind of gave them an information session on what challenges we're having and what they can do to help. So, and it wasn't too, I think it was the very next week, CAS was into a home and called us to come out and look at a situation that needed to be dealt with. So it's another set of eyes out there and a new partnership that's helping out with the cause. Just speaking of smoke alarms, we've had an increase of phone calls and walk-ins with inquiries about their smoke alarms. So the message is getting out. The media is helping us quite a bit. You notice when there's structure fires in the City of Toronto and that, it's always commented on, whether smoke alarms were present, whether they were working or not working. So people are now starting to take a little more notice, and we're getting those inquiries, which is good. So Kelly fields a lot of those inquiries right at her desk. She knows the answers to a lot of it, but sometimes they're a little more complex. So between the smoke alarms and the CO, I think we're slowly getting there. It's like the seatbelt campaign. I mean, there's still people not wearing seatbelts, which is shocking, but we're making changes with the smoke alarms. You'll see our fire hazard signs are back up. As most people think, it's damp, wet conditions in the spring. It's not. As soon as that snow melts, and if we're not getting significant rain, which to this point we haven't for spring, I think the next 4 or 5 days we're supposed to, but the fire hazard rating is set at moderate right now, but if we don't get that rain, we're going to be moving into high already, and that's very early for this time of year. So, and that's all I have for today.
Any questions? Councilor Brick?
Yeah, just a question about the public notices. So I did have comment from a couple of residents about the gas leak because they were trying to get from one end of town to the other. They were relying on Facebook for their information. And I know that I did speak to communications, and he said, yeah, they should like the town page. But town kind of closes down at 4:30. So is the town Facebook page and Twitter account the best place to get live information when something like this happens?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, quite frankly it is. Now all the other media sources were picking it up as well, so they kept announcing it over radio stations that it was closed. But one of the things that happened that was unfortunate is at one point they had a road block, we'll call it, at the OPP station, and they were notifying people that if you're going to Collingwood or the Superstore or beyond the gas leak, you're better to make the turn right here, instead of letting them drive all the way down to it and then turn around and come back. And then that decision was made at some point to remove that and move it further down. So I know there were a few people frustrated with making it all the way down and then having to turn around and come back. So that's something we're going to look at for the next time. But yeah, the social media, people know what's going on a lot more now than they ever did. So yeah, and all the other stuff goes along with that.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I received a couple of calls and emails with respect to this, and again, just frustration that they got all the way down there and then had to come back all the way around. But I guess, and perhaps this is a question for Public Works, so hopefully we'll have some discussion there. But this is the second major, I think, issue with the construction on River Road. I think last year, I think it was in the fall, we had a major water line break with digging, and now we have a major gas line break. So I can call before we dig. Is that happening?
Well, our Director of Public Works is here. I would expect that those companies have a very good idea of what they're. I'll let Kevin speak to it probably better.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And certainly, whether it's a homeowner or a contractor, has to call Ontario One Call to identify all the utilities within their limits of construction. The contractor did call and then have all necessary locates in place. To point the finger at the contractor just yet is, I think, a little premature. There's still an investigation underway through Enbridge in terms of who is at fault, whether it was a mislocate, a faulty locate, or an ignored locate. So at this point, we haven't received confirmation of what is the true cause, but as you can see when you drive down there are certainly locates throughout the limits of construction, from gas, telecommunications, water, wastewater, and storms. So.
And Mr. Chair, just to be clear, I wasn't pointing the finger at anybody. I was saying this is the second major issue, and these types of issues, I would think, in this type of situation shouldn't be occurring. These aren't minor issues; they're fairly major. I know the water issue is quite major, and this one is as well. So I just, to ensure the safety and the quality to our community, I think it's important, and that's what I'm hearing from the citizens.
But these pipes aren't breaking because of age. They're
No.
breaking because somebody.
Yeah, they've been clipped through construction,
Yeah, okay.
and certainly with it being on an arterial road,
Right.
and having that restriction in terms of rerouting. What committee may not know is that we had several gas services on the Bay Colony project, but because of its isolation,
Yeah.
it's a little different story. So certainly we proactively identify these locates to try and mitigate that, and they're supposed to hand dig around within a meter of these paint markings. The true case of its damage is still to be determined or relayed to myself. But we do what we can to avoid them, and certainly we rely on the contractor to properly excavate around those utilities.
Just one
Chief?
thing. Oh, sorry.
Why? Another question?
Just through you, your chair, if it's the same topic, I'll let you finish that before I ask my question.
Okay, yeah, just to follow up on the gas leak. So there were a number of residents, of course, concerned with safety. Natural gas is lighter than air, and when it's a leak outside, it just dissipates into the atmosphere, and it's not really a huge concern. We did evacuate a couple of homes that were very close initially, but when you can if you keep your home closed up and you're not getting gas inside the home and the leak is outside, it's not always a major safety concern. So it was monitored, and there were no issues in that respect.
Councillor?
Yes, and while we have our Public Works Director here, I just wondered what the fire department is doing to prepare for the wet ice storm. If you've got any plans for that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we've actually been talking about it. I mean, our emergency plan is in place, our control group, all that stuff is always in place for anything that's going to happen at any time. So there's just a kind of a level of awareness now that we're getting things ready on our end, and then I'll let Kevin speak to anything public works wise if there's something.
Yeah, in terms of public works, certainly we have all of the signage and barrel cones available, chainsaws that are ready to go in the event of removing trees or limbs that fall across the road, and we have standby and on-call
Any further questions of the fire chief? If not, I have a resolution moved by Deputy Mayor by Fulci and seconded by Councillor Boulanger. Resolved that the Community Service Section of Coordinating Committee has hereby received the April 2018 Fire Department report for information.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor by Fulci?
In favor?
Councillor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Smith?
In favor.
Mayor Smith?
In favor?
And Chair Stockwell.
In favor?
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 6 in favor and 0 opposed.
Thank you. Departmental staff reports. I think there's been 3 held, Madam Clerk, is that correct? In this
Yes.
section?
Yes.
And the first is, the Recreation Events Facilities Department, April the 12th, 2018, and that was held by
Councillor Bray and the Mayor.
Councillor Bray. You have it?
I do. Are we doing the consent agenda first, or? Yeah.
You want to go through everything? Item by item?
Normally we start during the.
All right, consent agenda. Resolved that the Community Services Section of Coordinating Committee has hereby received the April 12, 2018 consent agenda, item 3.4 through 3.4.3, and that the recommendation contained therein be adopted as amended. Yes, ma'am.
I think you said that there was 3 pulled. Can we know which 3 were pulled before we vote on that?
Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you. The first item being item 3.41 CI, the Recreation Events and Facilities Report. The second item being 3.43 under Other Matters, A, the Library Board Minutes. And the final item in that same section under Other Matters is E, the Safer Ontario Act.
And before we get there, we have one disclosure of pecuniary interest, Deputy Mayor Fulci, section, agenda section CSC 3.4.2 as it pertains to a family member. So, now moving along. First one held.
Oh, we haven't voted yet.
I'm going to vote on this one, the resolution I just resolved the Community Services Section Coordinating Committee does hereby receive the April 12th, 2018 consent agenda, item 3.4 through 3.4.3, and that the recommendation contained therein be adopted as amended.
And that was moved by, actually, we moved that.
Councillor
Hold on.
Oh, okay.
I don't know why I was opposed. Oh.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, it was moved by Councillor Boulanger and seconded by Deputy Mayor by Fulci.
Right.
Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor by Fulci?
In favor?
Councillor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Smith?
In favor.
Mayor Smith?
In favor?
Chair Stockwell?
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 6 in favor and 0 opposed.
Another 3 that were held. The first was the Recreation Events and Facilities. Mr. Roos, is he here?
Yep.
Yes, he's there. And this was held by, no, Deputy Bray? Councillor Bray?
Yes, I had just wanted to, and I have had a chance to speak to Chris, but I wanted to comment on the arena sound system. Now seems satisfactory by all staff, contractors, and the rental group. I know that that's something that I've certainly received a lot of resident concerns about over the last couple of years, so thank you for addressing that. And that was all.
You're welcome. Yes, we have gone through this system and clarified any concerns, and it seems satisfactory to all involved.
Councillor Boulanger?
Thank you. Being this was pulled, I had mentioned to you earlier, but I'll just read out from the recreation facility enhancements. The number of upgrades, sand, volleyball courts, and bocce ball courts. We have the resurfacing of the Ophir tennis courts, creation of a dedicated pickleball courts at the Star Arena, and installation of wall-mounted indoor basketball nets at the YMCA. So that's a lot of good stuff.
Yes, certainly.
Congratulations. Thanks.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I understand now. When you said facility, I was thinking about our facility department beyond the recreation improvements, and I must say that a lot of these projects are in collaboration with our Parks and Public Works partners as well. So we work with the stakeholders, and the implementation of projects is coming out of the Parks Department. But yeah, there's a number of positive improvements coming this summer.
Any other questions? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I asked to pull this as well with respect to the Enbridge gas distribution donation. I received about 5 weeks ago a call from Mark at Enbridge Gas. This is the second year in a row that they have contacted me and indicated they had some dollars to give away to our community, and did we have a place to put it. So absolutely, I said, yeah, we'll find a spot and put them over to Chris. But I think what's most important is that we, you know, the general public understand that Enbridge Gas in our community are doing great things. They're helping where they can, as much as they can, and this is another $3,000 donation now that will go to the youth center to help improve the old garage out back. So I want to thank Enbridge Gas for all they do in our community. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments on that section? If not, I have a resolution moved by Councillor Boulanger, seconded by Deputy Mayor by Fulci. Resolved that the Community Service Section Coordinating Committee does hereby receive the Recreation Events and Facilities Department report, monthly activity report, as information.
Mr. Chair, having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
Councillor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Smith?
In favor.
Mayor Smith?
In favor?
Councillor Stockwell?
Favor.
Thank you. The motion carries at a vote of 6 in favor and 0 opposed.
Thank you. Next one that was held under 3.4.3 other matters, the library board minutes. Councillor Bray, you held that one.
I did, thank you. I am the council rep for the library board. It's a position that I enjoy very much. We have a truly fabulous library. I held it because their annual report was published, and I know sometimes when we get a 300 or 400 page agenda, there's an awful lot of information to digest. So I just wanted to point out that our library had 53,500 visitors last year. There was 108,000 items borrowed. This tiny little library that we currently have truly does make miracles happen in their tiny space. They provide tech help, reading clubs, storybook trails. Our staff are very active, innovative, creative, and I thank Jackie and her team for really making miracles happen in a tiny space with a relatively small budget. So congratulations to Jackie and the library team.
Any other comments? If not, I have a resolution moved by Deputy Mayor Byfolchi, seconded by Councillor Boulanger. Resolved that the Community Services Section Coordinating Committee received the February 2018 Library Board minutes for information. Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Byfolchi?
In favor?
Councillor Bray?
In favor?
Councillor Smith?
In favor.
Mayor Smith?
In favor?
Chair Stockwell?
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 6 in favor and 0 opposed.
Thank you. The next item that was held was Section E, Safer Ontario Act, and Councillor Smith, you held that?
Yes, I did. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I pulled this because when I was reading through this, I saw one paragraph that said every municipality must develop a community safety and well-being plan that will be the catalyst for cooperation between various human and health services, including police sections. I did talk to our CAO to find out how that affected our council. Do we have to create another committee? And where does it stand with the existing committees that we do have? So if I may, I defer to our CAO for he would just explain some of the things in this new act.
Comments, sir?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. With respect to the community safety plan, that is a new requirement that is under the new Safer Ontario Act. The Act has received royal assent, but it hasn't yet to be proclaimed. There are a number of regulations that have to be implemented prior to that. The community safety plan is captured as part of that. I have spoken to the fire chief with respect to taking the lead on the development of our community safety plan. There's an example of a plan from the regional Peel that has been developed, and I forwarded that to the fire chief. So that particular activity is being addressed, or will be addressed by the chief, most likely in consultation with the police department and other agencies within our community, because it's a community safety plan. With respect to the other piece of the legislation, that's direct with respect to the question that was asked, upon proclamation, again with the regulations being adopted, is that the Huronia West detachment, which composed of Wasaga Beach, Springwater, and Clearview, instead of policing being governed or assisted through a community policing advisory committee, or what's commonly referred to as a CPAC, there will be a joint board. So there will be a police services board that will cover all 3 municipalities. So it'll be a board that covers the detachment. And that's a significant change in the sense that the CPAC is an advisory committee, and the police services board is a board that oversees policing in these 3 municipalities. Now, again, the existing Police Services Act is in effect until the regulations are adopted, so everything's status quo for the time being, but that will be a major change. I would anticipate that piece of it will probably come into effect January 1st. That seems to be an appropriate timing after the municipal election and when all appointments are being made to various boards. But it'll be very interesting, the impacts with respect to how policing is done in Huronia West when there is a board in place that can specifically give direction to the Ontario Police.
Give direction? Give direction?
Yes, the legislation is that I had a quick look at it, and there is proviso in the legislation that the Police Services Board can give direction to the police with respect to priorities within the jurisdiction as they pertain to policing.
That'll be interesting. Thank you. Mayor, did you have a comment on it?
Well, yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to indicate that under the Police Services Act, where there are police services boards in place, giving direction is not a new thing. The Police Services Board have, for many, many years, always been able to give direction. We haven't had a Police Services Board simply because we haven't been under a contract type situation with the OPP. This will certainly change that, where municipalities will have more say and direction in the policing in the community.
But my concern is that most of those, or if not all of those boards, hire and fire, and that doesn't happen with the OPP.
I'm not sure the answer to that, whether they hire or fire or not, but perhaps the CAO does.
With respect to the OPP, the Police Services Board does have input in hiring the detachment commander. So there is an involvement of the Police Services Board in that hiring action. With respect to the other part of it, I don't know that a board has been involved in that type of thing, but certainly they're involved in the hiring process.
Be interesting to watch. Thank you. Any other comments on that item? If not, I've got a resolution. Moved by Councillor Belanger, seconded by Deputy Mayor Fulci. Resolved that the Community Service Section of Coordinating Committee received the Safer Ontario Act correspondence for information. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Belanger.
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Fulci.
In favor?
Councillor Bray.
In favor?
Councillor Smith.
In favor.
Mayor Smith.
In favor?
Chair Stockwell.
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 6 in favor and 0 opposed.
Thank you. And that's the items for the agenda for today. We'll call it 10-minute recess for the next section. Thank you.
introduction, as committee is aware, in this year's budget we do have a placemaker for the design and potential implementation of some capital improvements to wastewater water pollution control plant, specific to the odor issues that we've experienced over the last several years. In advance of implementing any kind of capital major improvements, we've gone back to the Ontario Clean Water Agency, and they've engaged Brad Hoover, who is their operations and process specialist within Aqua, not out of this hub, but corporate Aqua. And Brad's come in and has had really looked at specific attention to the process in terms of everything from how we're wasting, retention times, and really looking at, rather than just Band-Aid or covering the problem, what is the cause of the problem. So Brad has done an excellent job in terms of evaluating the systems and the process and how the operators are managing the aerobic digestion. And Brad will be presenting those observations, as well as he does have some recommendations to bring forward for us to implement over the next several months, with the hopes to address the issue, not mask the issue. So with that being said, we do have Brad Hoover here, process specialist, as well as Richard Eagle, the director of operations with the North Simcoe Hub. Gentlemen, I'll leave it to them, and there'll be opportunities for questions thereafter.
So, as Kevin mentioned, I'm actually from the area here. To give a little background, I was actually an operator at the wastewater treatment plant. So I was on call for the area, so I'm very familiar with it. I currently reside in Collingwood, so this does matter to me quite a bit too, because it hits home. So first off, we'll give you some background. Back in 2015, Ainley Group completed an odor study, and it primarily looked at the ways of mitigating strategies. So not actually at the process, but how do we actually deal with the associated odors in the area. And their findings concluded that the odors were actually coming from the aerobic digester complex. And because of that, our staff at the time, the process compliance technician, actually took upon himself to do another study, and we introduced an 8-strain bacteria to try to actually deal with the odors biologically, and we've been doing that ever since, but it hasn't been able to completely rectify the issues of the odors in the area. So, as mentioned, my intention here was not to look at how do we contain and treat the odors coming from this failed facility. What is the actual cause and means that the odors are actually being produced, and how can we potentially look at preventing them from being produced. And so the entire focus started looking at the digester complex, but one thing about wastewater, it's very complex and it's all interconnected. And so as I started going into it, I had to keep going back for more and more data, and I ended up looking at the entire process itself. So this would be it's a flow diagram of the plant. It's a layout, but we actually end up looking just up at the upper left-hand corner, the sludge storage tanks area, because that's where the odors are coming from. But ultimately, the plant is all interconnected, and it's wastewater. The plant's a living, breathing organism in itself. So I focused the review. I started first looking at the wasting techniques, and we can waste at the plant in auto or in manual, and they both have associated issues with them in some of the design characteristics, and found some associated issues with some odors in there. Reviewed the daily sludge wasting, how much we actually, because it's a living, breathing process, we actually have to take, we're farmers, and we actually grow bugs, and we constantly have to remove the bugs, because if we don't, they'll overtake, and then the process will starve. And so it's a fine balance that we do at being able to control. And I ended up looking at the past 8 years of data to see how the plant was moving, pretty much trending over those time frames, because we get seasonal fluctuations, and it can be a dry year, it can be a wet year. And so some of the really quick findings from it, I know some of these numbers might not make sense, but they were findings that I had found. There was actually an increase, quite significant increase last year in daily flows of 25% we found throughout the year. And because of that, we add a chemical at the plant that's actually based on the flow rate. So it was also increased by almost the exact same, 26%. The raw influent properties were very similar to previous years. It actually leveled out right in about the middle of the last 8 years. One of the key things, though, I have aeration tanks, SRT, we have a sludge retention time. And for years we've been talking about going from 3 tanks. We actually have 4 very large aeration tanks. And they treat the sewage biologically. And we've been operating at 3, and for saving energy and optimizing process, we've been pushing to go down to 2. But because of the influx of the population in the summer, especially on weekends, there's always been concern of going down to 2. And so it's actually, our group has been working hand in hand saying, yes, you can do this. We punched all the numbers, and last year I would say is a tremendous success. We were able to prove that we would do it, and we optimized the plant to the best of its abilities. But in so doing, it actually creates more sludge as a slight byproduct of that, because the biomass, the bugs are much healthier. So we have to then send all this extra volume to the digester complex, and we settle it out, and we pull what we call supernate off the top of it. We try to thicken it, and we pull water, and we have to thicken this sludge up, but because our volumes increased, everything else increased, and it caused issues that way, because we were having to get rid of more than what we had prior in previous years. One of the things I did look at, though, was the provincial design guidelines. We try to revert back to what the province makes for recommendations, and so they recommend that we need to have 45 days to be able to break down the sludge even further than what we normally do in the process itself. It's the last polishing stage before it's either sent, in our case, to land application. But we ultimately need 25% more volume in the tanks to account for our settling period, so we can pull water off. And so when I actually plugged the calculations through and looked at everything, we're actually, if you look at the 2017 with no supernate, and in the numbers here, we're only at 27 days, and when we take that extra supernate into account, we only have 19 days. So we're actually quite below the provincial standards, which has a lot to deal with how we break down the sludge itself. I also then looked at the product that we've been adding, the 8-strain bacteria. They call it Accelerate. And I looked at seeing how do we break it down, where is it being dosed, how much time does it have, because it needs a certain amount of time in the digesters themselves to react to be able to break it down. And if we are literally removing it in the supernate that we take, is it being most effective? And all of that was looked, and how do we actually even brew it, how do we apply it to be able to optimize it. So from some of the findings, I started then looking at saying, well, what can we do to be able to create better settling, because we have issues. One of the problems is when we turn the digester air off, this is where all the odors come from. We turn it off to be able to pull all this clear water off and send it back into the plant. Well, it's a biological process, and we need sometimes significant time frames to be able to allow this to happen. And in that time frame, different bacteria start growing, and they actually start breaking down the product differently, and they create the odors that we smell. And so we call it aerobic, anaerobic. And so when I started looking at this, I knew if I could reduce the settling time needed, these bugs can't take over. And so one of the means of doing that is by potentially adding a polymer to it. And then the question comes in, where do we dose it? How much do we dose? A lot more questions, and it can get technical. So I then looked at the current process and said, can we, for a minimal cost, be able to modify a current part in the system where we could maybe try this, even try to thicken the sludge? And if we can thicken our sludge, if we can take it from, for instance, 1% to 2%, we've actually cut our volume in half. So we can cut our retention time. We can actually double our retention times because of this. So I looked at this and potentially looking at adding a polymer here to thicken it, or potentially adding an inline system where we can add this polymer to look at trying to help create better settling. And this would be for down the road, but the 2016 Comprehensive Capital Plan also recommended that we look at either suggesting enlarging the digesters or looking at thickening. And I'm an advocate of looking at technology, because the more tanks we have to operate them. We need energy to operate them. Let's look at operating them effectively and efficiently. And the new technology has really grown in these areas. And so I've looked at different ones. Ultimately, I believe that the rotary drum thickener would be an ideal area to look towards for energy and use. And so it helps thicken the sludge, and instead of needing larger tanks, we can optimize the tanks that we have. I then looked at, well, these are the recommendations. So polymer, treating the odors will not improve the process at the digester complex. And so for me, from a point, I say instead of spending money on treating, let's look at fixing the process so we don't have the odors. And it will, the entire process is it's all intertwined at the plant. Well, I also then looked to, I kind of glossed over a bit, but we actually add air at the plant, and we add it almost like in a fish aquarium. We have to have it at certain levels. So I had looked at those guidelines too and said, are we meeting those levels and the mixing at this complex itself? And if we aren't, then we need to add more air. And calculations showed that we actually need to add more air. And look at potentially how the product's used and how do we optimize the retention time in the digesters.
Thanks, Brad. So just recently, Director of Public Works and Brad and myself met with the Ministry of Environment and reviewed this memo that Brad prepared. Looked at the recommendations and put together a few stages of how we were going to proceed with addressing some of these recommendations or implementing these recommendations. And they are sort of, our first stage is going to look at things we can do process-wise. So what operational changes can we make, or any sort of low-cost capital adjustments. So we're going to start out with confirming and adjusting the dissolved oxygen in the digesters. We're going to look at developing protocols for transferring sludge, so we can actually achieve some further digestion, aerobic digestion, if we come up with a strategy on how we're transferring that material. And then propose some costing on how we can implement that gravity thickener that Brad mentioned earlier. So these are all low-cost operational type adjustments. And then we're looking at stage 2 was, so based on the success of step 1, let's see if we need to keep going forward. If we do, these are sort of ways that we can further enhance. So Brad spoke about adding polymer. So we would try that, adding some polymer in different locations and see how we can thicken up the sludge. And then optimizing the accelerate. So looking at having the rep come out, see if there's ways we can optimize dosing locations and that sort of thing. And based on the success of stages 1 and 2, if we had to get more into the higher capital cost items, we'd look at costing for rotary drum thickeners, and then the digester tank covers, which is more just masking the odors. It would be a last step sort of thing. And I think that's all we've got.
Thank you very much. Everybody in the audience couldn't see your face, but he is very passionate about wastewater. So thank you for that. And there was actually, some of us had a conversation yesterday about how lucky we are to have Aqua and the many staff and the expertise that you bring. So that's fantastic. Is there any questions? Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I concur. I'm watching their faces. It always amazes me how excited some people can get about poop. But clearly they're excited about it, and they do an amazing job for the town of Wasaga Beach, and we're grateful and thankful that you're our partners. So keep on being excited. A couple of questions. 25% more daily flow. What do you attribute to that? Is it a wet season? Is that water flow? Is that sewage? what, or a combination thereof?
I might let Rich speak to it a bit because I was just looking at the data itself.
I would suggest, yeah, we'd have to look into a little bit deeper, but my understanding is there really hasn't been a substantial growth within the town. So generally, yeah, it would be infiltration, water coming into the system. I think there has been some occurrences in 2018. So yeah, there's been some locations identified of infiltration. Yeah.
All right, and if I may, Madam Chair, when we talk about looking at the different options here and applying polymer, so on and so forth, I guess, and I have all the faith in the world in you folks and what you do, but are we heading in the right direction by doing that, or should we be really looking at biting the bullet and making the equipment changes that are required in order to fix this problem long into the future as opposed to short term?
Well, it's a fairly low-cost item. What it does, it gives you just a little bit more flexibility. So we'd have to look at the capital planning. How much is this going to cost to sort of bite the bullet and put in a thickener system, and then work the town. I mean, we operate the system with the town, so if there is an interest in implementing this sooner than later, we can certainly do that. These are more sort of low-cost ways that we can optimize things and then strategically plan when we want to slot something like that in. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Belanger?
Thank you. Yes, just further to that point, like, I mean, given our projected growth, like, is it inevitable that we do need to add that thickening system?
Yes, yeah, based on, so in 2016, the capital plan, Aqua, our corporate engineering services, put together a 10-year capital plan. Within that capital plan, I believe it's later in the 10 years,
right?
That there is a recommendation that that there should be some expansion or thickening of sludge to increase the capacity of the digesters. Yeah.
Okay, so further to that point, if we looked at total reserves that are on hand versus projected expenditures, that's what the reserves are there for. So, like, I mean, if it abated the order that much quicker, then maybe it should be considered.
One of the things is why, and I didn't explain it as well as I should have. One of the in order to stop the odors, the whole goal is that we need to aerate these tanks 24/7. A rotary drum thickener, because it removes all the extra water, no settlings required. These tanks can run 24/7 constantly, and because of that, then there won't be an associated odor issue because you don't need that settling time. I did not look at the energy savings inside of things. One can argue, we've been looking at things from an energy point of view in our office all the time, and because you can concentrate it, therefore you can sometimes run fewer tanks. It takes a little longer to fill up the tanks because your concentration, therefore your energy costs go down. And your sludge haulage costs also go down because we send it out per cubic meter. So if you can go from 2% solids to 4% solids, you can cut your costs in half. Now, usually we've been about 2.5, but we could get them up to over 4%. So there could be significant savings. There's accumulated savings on the side, but this piece of equipment needs to be engineered for the process, potentially pumps. From what I can see, the setup at the digester complex would work very well for this setup if it can be placed on the roof of the structure, because it's gravity, minimal pumps required, but there is an associated capital cost.
Thank you. Kevin, did you want to add anything?
Just a comment in terms of long term. Certainly there's capital improvements we can do in any facility in terms of expanding systems or digesters, which we do have in the plan, but long term we want to make sure that the process and how we're controlling that process is refined and optimized, so we're not relying on just capital investment. It's how we operate the plant more importantly than expanding. The expansion will come through development growth and those pressures, but we need to make sure that we're operating this facility as best we can for its durations. If I can just make one more comment. Brad did mention that on his assessment he identified that the air being fed to the digester complex
was less than what should be fed to the digester complex. So we implemented the second blower on March 1st, and to date we've only, the ministry's only received one odor complaint, and there was no, the complainant didn't leave their contact information or anything, so the ministry doesn't put much faith in that complaint. So some of these changes that we've made already are showing positive results. We hope it continues that way. But to Kevin's point, if we can optimize things, the whole plant will benefit from that.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Councillor Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just further to Councillor Belanger's question about whether we do it now or in 10 years, I think I'm concerned that 10 years with inflation, you know, what the costs are going to be. And, you know, if it's worth looking at what it would cost if we went and did it now. So I don't know if that's an option that you've looked at.
We could certainly put pricing together for council consideration.
And we'll leave that with Kevin to maybe update us as to where you think we should go with that. Because from what I'm hearing, you know, these other steps are important to make sure that we're efficient in how we do it before we just jump into something else. So we can leave that with Kevin maybe to update us further. Is there anything else on that? Thank you very much. Thank you for your passion.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Bray, seconded by Councillor Stockwell. Be it resolved that the Public Works section of Coordinated Committee does hereby receive the Wasaga Beach WWTP odor memo findings dated April 4th, 2018 for information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Belanger.
In favor?
Councillor Bray.
In favor?
Councillor Smith.
In favor.
Mayor Smith.
In favor?
Councillor Stockwell.
Favor.
Chair by Fulci.
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 6 in favor and 0 opposed.
Unfinished business, community transportation grant program. I assume we'll get an update on that in the future. Other agency reports, there are none. We have a consent agenda. It's moved by Councillor Bray, seconded by Councillor Stockwell. Be it resolved that the Public Works section of Coordinated Committee hereby receives the April 12th, 2018 consent agenda items 4.4.1 through to 4.4.3, and that all the recommendations contained therein be adopted as amended. And we have had item 4.4.3 pulled, as well as staff would like to provide an update about flooding on Shore Lane and 71st Street. Is there anything else to be pulled?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Belanger.
In favor?
Councillor Bray.
In favor?
Councillor Smith.
In favor.
Mayor Smith.
In favor?
Councillor Stockwell.
Favor.
Deputy Mayor, or sorry, Chair by Fulci.
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 6 in favor and 0 opposed.
Okay. And the item that we had pulled was the Wasaga Beach Transit Report. I'll read the motion first. It's moved by Councillor Stockwell, seconded by Councillor Bray. Be it resolved that the Public Works section of Coordinated Committee does hereby receive the Wasaga Beach Transit Report for March 2018 for information. And was it Councillor Smith who pulled that?
I just had one, Madam Chair, one question on the last page of the March statistics. I note that from March 2017 to March 2018, there's about a 500 ridership difference, and I just wondered if you knew why that would be. The chart says 8,242 in March 2017 and 7,738 in March 18.
I do know. Certainly, there's different trends if individuals, if you were to break that down and you have 500 trips over the course of, say, Monday to Friday, 4 weeks a month, and they're making 2 trips a month, that might equate to maybe a dozen people, 12 or 13 people that are no longer taking that specific route if they're at to and from work daily. But in terms of the actual, we do get fluctuations of this nature, but the actual specifics, we don't have that information.
Okay, it's just something I think we need to monitor, because at some point, if we want our ridership to go up, not down, I think that's the intent. So just wanted to bring that forward.
Okay, anything else on that? Okay, I've already read the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Belanger.
In favor?
Councillor Bray.
In favor?
Councillor Smith.
In favor.
Mayor Smith.
In favor?
Councillor Stockwell.
Favor.
Chair by Fulci.
In favor?
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 6 in favor and 0 opposed.
Thank you. And Kevin, are you giving an update regarding flooding on Shore Lane and 71st?
To the extent possible, as community is aware, we did experience some surcharging of our sanitary sewers back in, I believe it was early morning, February 21st. Staff were called out to Shore Lane in the vicinity of 74th Street. And the sewers had surcharged to a point where they were literally inches from overtopping the road and coming out of the manhole lid. There was surcharging all the way from effectively the pump station at 71st Street all the way through the sewer, the trunk sewer, to almost the cul-de-sac at the end of Shore Lane, distance of almost 1.5 kilometers. Staff have undertaken an investigation, and we strongly believe that a sanitary sewer manhole was tampered with upstream throughout that catchment area. We've since contacted the individuals and advised them of these issues, and there has been a number of residences along this corridor. Now, there's probably 100 properties along that trunk sewer from 71st Street to the cul-de-sac, and 60% of them are seasonal. So immediately following, immediately after becoming aware of this issue, we certainly tried to call the individuals, as many as we could, that we had information for, but we also sent out a letter the following day to advise them to come up to their properties and have a look at their basements, because that sewage was coming up through some of the basement drains. So we have seen 4, possibly 5 families that have come forward. We have been directing them, obviously through their insurance company, but also through the province and its contractors, who we believe are the responsible parties for effectively draining a storm catchment area into our sanitary sewer. So that investigation is underway on their side. We're confident with our findings, but the province and its Carillion, who are their area maintenance contractors, their adjusters are going through their own investigation. So we do have our insurance company involved, and George Thompson, our agent, has been working with us and communicating with their adjusters, and he's providing responses to a lot of the claims if they do come forward. Like I said, if the seasonal population come forward in July and August, we do anticipate there could be more as well. So.
Do you have anything else to add?
If I may, thank you, Madam Chair. So we are aware that there have been 5 insurance claims made, and through our investigation, the town has determined that there's no negligence or liability on the town's behalf. However, the residents that have submitted the claims are concerned. There's different levels of insurance that they have, different deductibles that they have. So they expressed some concerns through the mayor's office, and a meeting was arranged with these property owners. So there were five property owners that attended, husband and wife, and then some additional neighbors. So I think there were about a dozen people, and we explained, what had happened, the process, encouraged them to continue to work through their insurance companies, and basically indicated that it's currently under investigation by MTO and the contractor. And they're still concerned because of their different insurance coverages that they have, but at this point, from the town's perspective, we're treating it as an insurance matter. It's them to go through their insurance company. So our insurance adjuster was there, George Thompson, Kevin, myself, the mayor, and everybody got the same message. And at this point, we're just waiting to hear back from their insurance adjusters, that being the contractor and MTO, to find out, what they've concluded with their investigation. They're being very deliberate and meticulous in their investigation, so we haven't heard back yet. But as soon as we hear, then we've committed that we would continue to communicate with the residents and keep them informed. So we just wanted to give Public Works Committee an update in terms of where that is at, because as members of council, you may get calls as well in terms of what's happening, and we will endeavor to keep you informed as we move forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Belanger?
Thank you, Chair. When you indicated that when the seasonal residents return, we might get a few more claims, what is the risk of if there was a situation and it's left unaddressed for a period of time and the costs associated? Have we gone beyond the phone and the letter to make contact with people in that area? Or are we not concerned that this potential sewage could be sitting in their basement for an extended period of time?
I'm sure. Certainly, we're concerned. This is a concern for us, absolutely. So we've done the phone call and the letter, but I know the area residents have also they've got an email circulation to a lot of the neighborhood as well, and I know Mr. Posavon and through that group they've identified or they've been able to reach out to others. But in terms of our point of contact, really the only means of contact is through the property tax information in terms of who to contact and how. So without sending them a letter or perhaps a second letter, we can certainly do, but we haven't been able to reach out beyond that.
Go ahead.
So, thank you. Just further, so I guess what I'm saying, are we auditing the 120? Do we know how many have been inspected? Do we know how many that we haven't been able to contact? And then could we do a follow-up with a neighbor? Or all I'm saying is this, if somebody comes back and something's been sitting for an extended period of time, you're going to have a pretty irate individual, I would think. But
Letters and phone calls went to every one of them. Is that correct?
Correct.
So it's really hard to do more than that, I think. I think the neighbors are talking and... Yeah. Mayor Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the CAO had indicated, I'd received several calls and emails from the residents that had been affected by this, and so I arranged a meeting. And although we have made it very clear to the residents in that meeting that the town, we feel the town has no liability and responsibility here. We didn't cause this issue. We're quite confident, our staff are quite confident in our investigation that this was caused by tampering with a manhole cover further upstream, if you will. I strongly believe that council should be doing the best we can to help make these folks whole. This was a situation that had nothing to do with anything that they would have done. These folks told us the stories. In the middle of the night, they're woken up, they go into their basement, and they literally have 1, 2, or I think maybe as many as 3 geysers of sewage coming into their basement, shooting up a foot, 2 feet. I think at even one point someone said almost 3 feet into their basement and filling rapidly. And they made the appropriate calls to the town, which then went through to answering services, and eventually we got out there and investigation was done. And I think fairly quickly, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, it was recognized that the manhole cover had been displaced partially when we got there, but we feel maybe completely at one point. Is that correct?
Yeah, so at first, when we did arrive, we certainly looked at the manhole adjacent to that property that contacted us, and when it was that high, then you start to go downstream and kind of chase the issue in terms of whether there's an obstruction. So we followed every manhole all the way to the sewage pumping station, and the pumps couldn't keep up with the flow of water that was coming through. And eventually, that evening or the next day, it was confirmed upstream on the highway, which is, you wouldn't think, it's actually probably the highest point in the system, but because of its proximity to that catchment area and the flooding that happens there historically, we did find that source, and we were able to confirm that there were barrel cones and it wasn't intentionally left open. We were out there as quickly as we could to try and isolate the issue and confirm the issue, but it was something we've never seen. And we haven't had issues with this sewer. It's been in the ground for 25 years, and there's been no issues with it, no issues with the pump station. So it was quite shocking and kind of head scratching in terms of why all of a sudden do we have this issue.
So to that point, Madam Chair, you know, I indicated to these folks that as the mayor, I was going to do everything and bring this to committee or council as to what we could do to help these folks in order to become whole on this. If this is negligence on behalf of the ministry or one of their subcontractors, it certainly has caused havoc for these folks. It's caused havoc for our staff in the town, and someone needs to make them whole. And I think that council, I'm hoping that council would agree with me that we should be doing whatever we can and as much as we can to help them along in that process. I think that they're going to be up against an insurance company. And we all know that insurance companies are going to do everything they can to pay as little as they can. But the fact that I think this manhole was removed intentionally and caused, and Kevin, if you would indulge me, Madam Chair, Kevin, could you just, you mentioned in the meeting the quantities of water that the pumps were capable of pumping versus the quantities of water that they were dealing with. Can you just let the committee know what that was?
I know that I know Richard's here and they operate the pump stations, but I know the design capacity of the pump station, I believe, is around 32 liters a second. And when Doug, our sewer water foreman, inspected those pumps that early morning, even the standby pump was on and it was pumping at over 70 liters a second, and it still couldn't keep up, and that's why the surcharging happens upstream. So, you know, there was certainly a lot of water, and we know the volume of water that overtops Beechwood Road and surrounds that property on any given event. And like I said, we've never witnessed this, and we've never experienced this before, so it's a bit concerning.
So my point is, Madam Chair, that we haven't experienced this before. We've probably experienced conditions as bad and probably even worse in the past with rapid melting and flooding. This was clearly negligence on someone else's behalf, and I really believe and would ask committee to consider doing all we can to help these folks become whole through whether it be through their coverage and their amounts, their deductibles, so on and so forth. And I don't know what that is at this point. I think staff are going to have to look at that. We'll have to wait to hear back from some of these folks where that is or where they're at. But this is a very unfortunate situation. It's very concerning, and I think we need to make it clear to anyone in Wasaga Beach that when someone else outside of this community causes an issue like this, that we're going to stand behind our citizens and help to rectify the problem and make them whole. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm sure we'll know more as the investigation moves forward, and I'm sure staff will update us more on that. Okay, and if there's nothing else, we will recess for 10 minutes before the next section of coordinated committee. Thank you.
This is the Development Services section of the Coordinating Committee. We have one deputation today from Celeste Develops Planning, Inc. And Celeste is here regarding Park Ridge Lifestyle Communities, Wasaga Meadows East Phase 4. And that, I guess Celeste can go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. With me today is Julie Paveo, who is the file lead on this for Park Ridge, and she is the main person who's leading this development project. This property is located at the southeast corner of Wally and Theme Park Drive, and George was kind enough to circulate a copy of the plan to you. The property is about 7.6 acres, which is 3.1 hectares. And this is the final phase of Wasaga Meadows East. It's very similar to the development that already exists on the west side of Theme Park Drive. And you might be familiar with that area. It's Clover Crescent and Chestnut Lane, I believe, is in there. So the number of units that are proposed are 66. These are land leased units, similar to other projects that Park Ridge has been involved in. There's a proposed stormwater management plan, stormwater management pond. There's a small open space block, and there is over 30 visitor parking spaces. These lands are designated tourism commercial, and they have a commercial rezoning. So our request is to redesignate those lands to residential and to rezone to the R3 category to allow this development to proceed. There have been a number of technical reports submitted, engineering reports, environmental reports, archaeology, the first engineering submission, a planning justification report, and a traffic report. And your staff deemed the application complete earlier this year. The proposed use conforms, in my opinion, to the provincial policy statement, the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, the county official plan, and the town's official plan. We've met with your staff, and as a result of that meeting, we have revised the look of these buildings to add some dormers to the upper part of the roof area. And we have changed the corner units to add additional windows. And we're also going to clearly identify snow storage areas on the plan that you see before you. So my request to you today is to respectfully request your approval for the scheduling of a public meeting for this development. And we have a short video just to give you some context of where this property is and what it will look like, hopefully, if it is approved by your council. Let me turn the lights down. So Lakes of Wasaga is in green, Meadows East is in the blue, and the red is the property we're speaking about today. So this is the existing development on Clover Crescent and Chestnut Lane across the road from the property we're talking about today. You can see this is a land lease community, and where we're looking now is towards the property that is proposed to be developed. This is the existing Lakes of Wasaga property to the north of the property we're speaking about today. And then this is as if we were heading south from the existing Lakes of Wasaga. We're moving southerly to the subject property. And then this is a view from the north looking, that's Wally across the bottom of the screen now. And then we're moving towards the property that is being contemplated for development. This is an artist's representation of what the development might look like. You'll see we've added the dormer windows, suggestion by your planning manager. The colors are not anything that Park Ridge is committed to. In fact, the roofs are likely to be gray rather than the colors that you see here, but this is just the artist's perception. That would be the community mailbox that you see on the right-hand side there, and the visitor parking. that would be the corner treatment of a unit. This is a bird's eye view. That's a stormwater management pond in the bottom left. This would be the entire development. This is 66 units. Again, this would be the entrance with the storm pond on the left-hand side. The guy on the motorcycle, don't know who he is. And moving into the development here, showing sidewalks. And there's the guy in the truck. This just gives you an idea of what something would look like after it's developed, and I think it's helpful to get an understanding of what the density is. And the density for this development is quite low. Again, 66 units. The property is quite large to allow 66 units. This is the existing on the opposite side of Theme Park Drive, and that's the rear yard treatment with a berm and some trees on the berm. And we are working with staff on talking about doing some ornamental fencing along that rear yard on Theme Park Drive. This is a proposed stormwater management pond looking south into the development. And this, I think, is the final shot of what the development might look like day and night. So thank you very much. And again, a request is for recommendation to proceed to a public hearing. Thank you. Julie?
You've got everything over? Thank you. Are there any questions from committee regarding this? No, I have one comment, if I may. I saw a baby carriage. Is this family or is this a senior student?
That would be the grandchild.
Oh, okay.
My understanding is that it's a land lease community and it's geared towards seniors, but that doesn't mean there won't be grandchildren there, but I don't think that's what your market is, it's not families.
It's definitely going to be adult lifestyle, just like we have.
Great, thank you. Well, if there's no questions, thank you for your presentation. It's another good investment by Parkbridge in our community, and it serves a great age-related group too, so that's very good. Thank you very much. This will be coming up, I think, in our consent agenda.
Okay.
And if it hasn't been pulled, and I don't see that it has been, it'll probably proceed to public meeting. You'll be notified by the planning department, is that correct? Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just one note before we move on is that there was an addition to the agenda, a late addition, addendum note. You probably received a copy in your boxes, item 5.4.1, and that will be in the consent agenda, and at this point hasn't been pulled, but because it's a late addition, I wondered if anybody had any concerns to pull it. Seeing none, I think this will continue with the rest of the agenda. We have no agency reports. Consent agenda I spoke to already. We have one pulled, and I'll deal with the motion first, but we do have one pulled. Official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and draft plan of subdivision, TPC Marwood at Marwood. So the first motion we have is moved by Councillor Stockwell, seconded by Councillor Belanger. Resolved that the Development Services Section of Coordinated Committees hereby receives the April 12, 2018 consent agenda items 5.1 through 5.4.3, and that all the recommendations contained therein be adopted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Belanger.
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Byfolchi.
In favor?
Councillor Bray.
In favor?
Mayor Smith.
In favor?
Councillor Stockwell.
In favor.
Chair Smith.
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 6 in favor and 0 opposed.
Okay, so we'll move ahead to the full item, which is item 5.4.1, item 2. And that was pulled by Councillor Bray.
Thank you.
clear, I realize it's at the table today to move forward to a public meeting, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to ask staff if they had received, or if there was a response to the correspondence that we received from the residents. I think the latest one, the February correspondence, made reference to a restrictive covenant on this property, and I just wasn't sure how that impacted this next step to move forward to a public meeting.
Thank you. Is that Kemi, you come forward, or Doug yourself?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize to Councillor Gray, but I did not hear the last part of what Councillor Gray was saying, so I'm not clear on what the...
How to answer my question?
Yeah, what was the...
Okay, we've received, so as members of council, we've received a number of pieces of correspondence from different residents in the area. The last one that I remembered made reference to a restricted covenant. I have no knowledge of what a restrictive covenant to do with sewage and water would have on this, on the impact of this, but I knew that it was kind of at the back of my mind that I had received that and I hadn't seen a response go back. So I'm not sure if this is something that will be addressed at the public meeting or if it has been addressed and I just wasn't aware of it.
So it is one letter among many that we've received from residents in the neighborhood, and my understanding is that it references a condition in plan of subdivision, condition of approval from a previous plan of subdivision, and I believe it is the one for Marwood Drive proper. I think the letter references that in that agreement it stipulates that it's a limited number of homes that are approved based on water services that are available, which would have been the case at that time in 2003. The reference that it is a restricted covenant is not entirely correct. It's a condition of approval in a plan of subdivision. However, what staff have done is we've forwarded the letter to the town lawyer, and in particular the town lawyer who's been hired to address planning matters on behalf of the town. The intent is that in reporting back to committee and to council, staff hope to address all of the issues that have been raised from the public to date, and there are a number of issues, and it will take a little bit of time. But so the report itself might be a little longer than what we're used to, but the intent is to address each and every one in terms of summarizing what the issues are that have been raised by the public to date, and providing a response. In what we have before us today is staff are simply asking to move the application forward along through the planning process to formally secure public comments at a planning meeting.
Thank you. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. So any comments that you've received to date, though, will you be requiring them to be made again at a public meeting, or are you taking those as part of the submission?
Thank you. Any comments that we've received to date, we are treating them as public comments submitted on behalf of the public with an opinion on this application. So we will treat them as if they were submitted at the public meeting. However, the public, given that the public meeting is held under the Planning Act, and those minutes are recorded under the Planning Act, and any appeals to the Ontario Municipal Court, or LPAT as it may be, it may be wise that if the public wants to formally make those comments again, then that forthcoming public meeting that staff are asking for would be the time to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee members? I just have a couple of comments, if I may. Do you know if OMB has been asked for, or is this anywhere with the OMB as yet?
There has been no appeal of this application at this time.
Okay, well, I just want to make a suggestion. We have a report here on the new rules for LPAC, and I suggest that if any members of the public are interested in the changes that are occurring, that they look that up and hopefully be posted to our website somewhere, so that we do they're fully aware of the changes regarding the OMB, because that came into effect in April, so. And the other one, further to Councillor Bray's question earlier, is it currently at the lawyer, or have you heard back from the lawyer?
It's currently with the lawyer.
Okay.
There are several different letters that we forwarded to the town lawyer for comment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any other comments? No? Okay, have a motion before me, thank you. Resolved that the Development Services Section of Coordinated Committee, I'm sorry, it was moved by Councillor Stockwell and seconded by Mayor Smith. Resolved that Development Services Section of Coordinated Committee recommends to Council to hold a public meeting pursuant to the requirements of the Planning Act to obtain public and agency input with regards to the applications for draft plan of subdivision and to amend the official plan and comprehensive zoning bylaw submitted by TPC of Marwood Inc. for lands legally described as Lot 26, Concession 7, located at 31 Marwood Avenue in the town of Wasaga Beach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Boulanger?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bypolsky?
In favor?
Councillor Bray?
In favor?
Mayor Smith?
In favor?
Councillor Stockwell?
In favor.
Chair Smith?
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 6 in favor and 0 opposed.
Thank you. So that concludes this Development Services section of Coordinated Committee, and we will take a brief until we get the secretary in place, and be 10 minutes, I would think.
Call this meeting back to order for general government section. Under 6.1, deputation, petitions, and presentations in public meetings, we have two. The first one is Mr. Andrew Siegwart, I hope I pronounced that correctly, President of the Blue Mountain Village Association organization on behalf of the South Georgian Bay Labor Supply Task Force will be in attendance to give the committee an overview of work that South Georgian Bay Labor Supply Task Force is undertaking, as well as the key accomplishments and current initiatives. So, welcome, and we're going to darken the room. I'm going to move back to my seat. Here it is.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mayor Smith, Deputy Mayor Bifolchi. Did I get that right?
You did.
Thank you. Councilors, staff, and residents, local residents, thank you for having me today. I will, hopefully this can be interactive, so I have some information to share on the Labor Supply Task Force that we've formed in the South Georgian Bay region. Feel free to jump in and ask questions along the way, and of course we can talk at the end. You'll see on this main slide here a list of all the Labor Supply Task Force participants. This is really an initiative that is regional in scope because the labor shortage is such, and the labor market is such that it really involves all of our municipalities. It's a complex dynamic because our catchment area cuts across multiple counties, multiple municipalities. But in spite of that, our teamwork is really what's driving results and moving forward. So I wanted to spend some time today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the tourism industry at a glance. I know being a tourism-driven economy, you likely have a lot of this data, but I want to share a couple of data points for you. I want to give you a sense of the scope of the labor shortage, some of the challenges and risks that we see for our regional economy as well as local economies, and then the work of the task force and what we're working on right now. This slide just shares some stats and numbers on the tourism industry impact. Tourism represents 1.78 million workers across Canada. You can see at the top left there are 5 sort of well understood sectors of tourism: food and beverage, transportation, recreation, entertainment, accommodation, and travel services. I think a lot of people don't realize that tourism is more than just your food and beverage server or the hotel that you might visit or the campground you might visit. It's quite a spectrum. In Ontario alone, you can see some metrics there. Tourism represents 5% of the labor force in all of Ontario, so it's quite a big driver and employer. And right down at our local level, Bruce Gray Simcoe, you're looking at 17,000 employees and over 1,400 tourism employers or businesses. So it's pretty significant impact to our economy and our labor force. One of the things that is very true about the tourism sector, but is often not well understood, it really requires every business discipline to make a tourism business successful. So you have tourism operations, you have e-commerce, security, human resources, marketing professionals, entrepreneurs. I mean, really every business discipline you need is required in tourism. And for small business operators, they often have to have a little bit of knowledge in all those disciplines. So it's even more challenging when you're an entrepreneur. Another important factor, we rely on the partnership and services of supporting sectors. So construction, landscape, arts and culture is an example. All of those local players we rely on, and that's an additional source of economic development and employment. I'll give you an example. In the town of, or in the Blue Mountain Village, we spend multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just on hiring local talent to entertain guests when they come to visit the region. So, part of our investment isn't just our workforce, but it's also ensuring that the arts and culture sector can thrive and a lot of artists can stay and live in the South Georgian Bay and be employed through the work that we do. So it really goes beyond just the front lines, so to speak. I wanted to spend some time just talking to you a little bit about the labor supply dynamic at a national level. So the 5 sectors I indicated earlier, this slide gives you a sense within those sectors of the types of jobs that are in high demand and are difficult to fill across the country. This statistic comes from the Tourism HR Canada, which is a national labor market planning institute. And the point I want to leave you with here is that in all of these sectors, we are experiencing shortages nationally at the front lines, at a specialty skill level and at a supervisory level. So it really does cut across sort of the career ladder, if you will. Another interesting point here, when you look at these 5 sectors, another way of looking at these is this is the customer journey. So let's say you're leaving the GTA and you're coming up to the region, you're coming to Wasaga Beach for a week of vacation. Each one of these is a step on your journey as a tourist. First, you're gonna, look into some options, you're gonna secure accommodation, you're gonna come and take care of, you're gonna either go to the beach one day or you're gonna go to Wasaga Beach, skydive, you're gonna take some recreation, you need some transportation to get here, and of course you're gonna go out and dine. And have great dinner. So if each of those sectors or each of those points on the customer journey is experiencing acute labor shortages, that means regionally, and perhaps even in this case nationally, we might not be giving international visitors the true total experience that they should expect. And when you look at how we have to compete against other regions in the country or even other destinations globally, that's a concern. And one important reason why we need to help address the issue. This is a really interesting slide. It was prepared by the Boston Consulting Group. This talks about globally where labor surpluses or shortages are per country. So right now, if you look at Canada in the middle of that slide there, about 3% of our current workforce, we have a surplus of workers, and that's, mirrors closely our average unemployment rate. It's very tight. And you can see other countries right now have a much higher surplus. By 2030, only 12 years from now, Canada is projected to have quite a large deficit of labor supply. This is across the country. So that would represent about 11% of our workforce we would be short. So that's significant nationally. The point that I think is even more acute for us to look at is look at all the countries on this slide here that are also going into a deficit situation. So today we rely heavily on immigration to grow the Ontario economy overall, as an example. What you're going to see here in the coming years is some competition among countries across the world to keep their workforce because they're going to have similar labor shortage issues. So countries like China, countries like India, countries like Brazil, Russia, Germany, they're going to work even harder to keep their current workers, but also to recruit from other nations. So we often talk about the labor shortage as being very local, but it's actually national and quite international. So just a bit of context for why we've really formed this working group. At a more local level, the 4 Counties Labor Board, which really looks at Bruce, Grey, Huron, and Perth. So Wasaga data isn't in this list, but it is a good indicator. So I want to just share a couple of trends that have been picked up. This was a survey that was just done, about 550 employers, some interesting findings. So you can see here in that catchment area the percentage of the total number of new hires and sort of where it nets out in terms of full-time, part-time, and seasonal. One of the challenges that we often face in looking at seasonal is it sometimes has a bad reputation. And a lot of folks in the economic development world or other worlds will look at seasonal work as a bad thing. And in fact, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And it's in fact a big part of our workforce and our industry. So whether you're in tourism, whether you're in municipal affairs, we rely on a seasonal workforce. So the trick for us is how do we spread that seasonal workforce and grow so that we can have employments throughout multiple seasons, but it's still a big component of our work, and it's something we're going to have to be paying attention to and make sure we can service well. So when you think of the big swings in the winter and in the summer, it's really challenging for operators to recruit for those short stints, and that's something we all have to work on. Employers surveyed were asked what of the applicants that they were seeing for positions, what was the quality of the candidates, and 77% rated them either as fair or poor, which is a challenge. And the reason for that, they gave us 3 reasons. Reason number 1 was there just was not enough applicants to begin with. Reason number 2 was that specific skill sets related to their jobs were not present. And then number 3, a lack of an alignment among attitude and culture. And so, you know, in the service business, you really have to be service oriented and positive, and you have to have some of those basic fundamental skills, and those appear to be lacking in a lot of the applicants. I'm sure many of you have heard the same feedback from the folks we spoke to. This slide here shows at a local level the tough to fill positions. So much like the national slide, you're looking at folks at the entry level as well as at that specialized or management level. So I think that's an interesting dynamic. There's a lot of shared experience locally as well as nationally. Here is a stat that I found particularly troubling. The vast majority of employers had at least one position that was very hard to fill throughout the year. 30% of those took more than a year to fill that position. So when you think about the demand and the challenge that that's putting on operators, particularly independents, if you're a small business and you're one person short for an entire year, that's going to really add to the stress level. And I think that probably is this is a really good statistic to give you a sense of why the business community might be feeling a little exhausted. In the year ahead, 75% of employers plan to recruit. So that's the good news. They're looking for people. The question is, will we have the labor supply to meet that demand? In spite of some of these challenges around our local labor force, employers are doing everything they can to get ahead of the game. So working with all the service agencies that exist, and there are some great ones in our communities, looking to hire from abroad and outside of region, improving their compensation packages and benefits. So, you know, a lot of tourism operators were already paying above minimum wage rates before we saw movements in the minimum wage, because they had to be competitive. So employers are doing a lot there to try to get ahead. However, actually a few more stats just to give you a sense of the dynamic. In the 4 counties labor market that I was referring to, since 2004, about 11% of the workforce dropped, representing about 18,000 workers, a little more, almost 19,000. And that's strictly because you have aging population and then you have an out-migration of youth. So those two things together has caused that. The area has an unemployment rate of about 4.5% compared to the 6% average. And I know that some of these numbers, you know, they're sort of South Georgian Bay West focused, but these dynamics do impact Wasaga Beach, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But as an example, in the village alone, Blue Mountain Village, probably about 30% of our workforce lives in the town of Wasaga Beach. So I don't know if folks were aware that the number was that high, but in the South Georgian Bay region, when we started the winter season this year, our estimates, based on a good sample size that extrapolated across the number of employees, we were short about 700 team members to get the season up and running. Think about what that means in terms of lost tax revenue, lost profitability, lost service to our visitors. So that's the dynamic on the labor force side. Then we go and look at some of our economic challenges that are really being driven by our fantastic growth. So housing costs in the region are at a major high. Region-wide, listings under $300,000 dropped 41% year over year. It's a significant number. Town of Blue Mountains, as an example, average house price is now over $800,000. Post-secondary tourism programming in our region hasn't been as robust as it could be, although Georgian College in Collingwood has made an announcement and they're going to be adding some programming that's going to help. And of course, we've had challenges in that we don't necessarily have a true regional economic strategy, which means some of these dynamics are hard to address together. And also childcare shortages were really observed as a challenge. And you know, this is part of I always make a mention of this when I speak to folks, but the tourism sector itself is just misunderstood. And I really believe it is not as valued as it should be, given its important role in our economy and what we do to sustain the region. So, some big risks. Obviously, lost revenue is a big one. This second point here is the one that probably keeps me awake at night the most, and that is that I'm talking to a lot of operators who are detuning their operations. So what I mean is they might not have the housekeeping teams that they require in the high seasons, so they're dialing back their marketing. And they can do that by, you know, raising room rates. They can still meet their targets, but the problem is that the smaller businesses that rely on those demand drivers lose out because of less traffic. I've talked to a lot of restaurateurs, and I'm sure many of you have heard it locally, where they're dialing back their menus to a basic offering because they have such a shortage of kitchen teams that they know that they can get this type of product out to customer. But it's not the type of product that our visitors are expecting. So that's a risk regionally that over time we might not be seen as the innovators we are and should be. And of course, you know, tax growth can be a challenge. On our side of the region, real estate values are really high and growing, and a lot of that is because of all the amenities that tourism brings. If the tourism engine can't continue to grow, then if the services decline, then some of those housing values could decline as well. So those are all the dynamics we're observing. A little bit of challenge, but there is an action plan in play, and I want to thank the folks in this room for supporting it, because Wasaga Beach is a part of our Labor Supply Task Force. Johanna and team are working closely with us. So we've developed this 5-point plan to sort of help address it. So one is champion diverse real estate and attainable housing across the region. So we know in each community in the South Georgian Bay there are different real estate dynamics, but collectively, if we look at it together, we should be able to develop a strategy that looks at creating the conditions for housing across the spectrum of your lifespan and the different types of housing you need. So perhaps we need a couple of dormitory style projects for the seasonal workflow to make it easy for folks to come and live. Perhaps we need to look at more rental housing or entry-level condos, family homes for young families to come and live here and afford to live here. In the town of Blue Mountains, we have, as an example, a lot of weekend properties that are high in value and beautiful, and they contribute a lot to the tax base, but they're only occupied on weekends, and during the week, they're essentially ghost towns. So what we're not seeing is that community development, and you want families and kids and services. And so that's one dynamic from one municipality. Each municipality has its own unique dynamic. Wasaga Beach has been really helpful in being a place where a lot of workforce find a home, but in the future there are some pretty ambitious plans in this municipality to invest in its tourism products and offerings, and that's going to have an impact on the current way in which tourism workers find themselves. So I only have a few more minutes. I might be going over time, but stop me if you want me to slow down.
We're probably a little over right now. Maybe we'll give you another 1 minute.
1 minute?
And then we'll
Deal.
ask.
So you can see the strategy on the board. We've done a lot of research. We've hosted a couple of forums. There's a transportation task force that's been formed. That's looking at expansion of transit so that we can have better worker mobility. And then more importantly, we've retained a housing consultant who is going to develop for us a roadmap based on what I described earlier in terms of the attainable housing piece. Wasaga Beach Economic Development is involved. We're engaging employers in the region to participate, and we're also reaching out to employees to get their perspective. So by the end of May, we should have a report finalized, which will provide a little bit of a roadmap on what we can do to improve the housing initiative and to improve the conditions for labor supply in the region. I thought it was really important to share with this group for two reasons. One is that you're participants and we're working on this together, but I do believe in the context of this municipality, as you're charting your course forward in your tourism advancements, hopefully you'll be able to learn from some of the experiences we have had along the way, and I will be here on behalf of the Village Association and the task force to share any additional knowledge to be of assistance.
Okay, thank you very much. Just before I take comments and questions, I just want to point out the earlier parts of the meeting went fairly quickly, and as chair, I thought we're so reliant on tourism in our area that that I extended some additional time for that. So any comments or questions? Mayor Smith and then Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, thanks for the presentation. A phenomenal presentation. Very interesting. A lot of information I think we probably already had a good idea of, but important to bring it to the forefront. And for those of you who don't know, I've been in the hospitality business going on almost 35 years now, and in all that time, the last 3 years, I cannot begin to tell you how difficult it is getting to get employees, and we're seeing that when you have employees of 200 and employees of 1 or 2, and it's important to note, we've seen this, we've heard this through the county, and I've heard it here in Wasaga Beach, and even in Alliston with Honda, that there are even jobs out there that pay between $20 and $30 an hour. These are substantially well-paying jobs with benefits and cannot get people to fill them on a regular basis, understaffed. And so, excellent presentation, and thanks for doing that. And thank you for being clear on the fact that the Village of Blue, who I think does a phenomenal job and is certainly a leader in the tourism industry, and we can all learn from and glad that we can work with to help us as we move forward with our redevelopment here. So thank you for that. I'd really like to see the County of Simcoe at the table here as well. I've noticed that they're not here throughout the presentation, and I know that the County of Simcoe does a phenomenal job as well at all of these aspects, and it'd be great to see them there. I'm very, very comfortable that we have our employees, Johanna Griggs at the table. She's brilliant in this field as well, and so we're confident and comfortable there. There is so much that needs to be done, and the workforce is it's quickly becoming an issue that if we don't soon find some reason around it, that we're all going to be in a lot of trouble. And what I say by that is, it's interesting when you hear people today say, I can't find a job, and I always say to those people, with all due respect, then you're not looking, because there's for help signs everywhere at every level, in Canada, in the U.S., you name it. This is quickly becoming a crisis. Staffing, the provincial government has virtually put a hold on any foreign worker recruitment to be brought in to the province, and I think there needs to be some work done there. So can you just quickly tell me what is the thoughts behind the task force and lobbying the province on opening those doors again?
Sure, through the chair. I would agree with you. We are at a crisis zone, and it is going to have a major impact on a lot of aspects of our local economy. The county is at the table, so both Grey County and Simcoe counties are part of our task force, and we're working with them. They sit around the table with us, and they've helped create our action plan. Housing I spend most of my time on the housing piece, but the transit connectivity is a big one, as is the education work and childcare. So we're sort of looking at this as we need to sort of improve our infrastructure and our community connectedness so that we can get that free flow of workers. So that's a part of what we're working on. As it relates to the province and the feds, so on behalf of the task force, I have been participating in different lobbying efforts through my affiliations with different tourism entities to socialize the issue and to share our local concerns. I met with our local MPP just recently. So the good news is the work that we've been doing has been picked up by a lot of local media across the region, and the politicians are starting to pick up on that. Our workforce, our attainable housing project, which we got funding from all of our partners, was actually partially funded by the province as well. So the province is at the table with us, and what we're working on from a housing perspective, this study hasn't really been done anywhere in Ontario. It's precedent setting. So one of our commitments was once we're done, we will bring this back to the province and we will look at advancing this discussion beyond. So I would say we're kind of leading the charge in setting the stage for how others can engage. But both at the provincial and the federal level, we're rattling cages.
supplementary, Mr. Chair, if I may. So I indicated that I'd like to see the county here, and I guess I took that from the 2018 survey observations where the county, we had Bruce, Gray, Bruce, Huron, and Perth, and I didn't see Simcoe there. So
it's through the chair. It's a good point. We do have some fresh data that will link back to Wasaga and this county, but we're a little more organized on that side from a data perspective. So getting more data from the Simcoe side is going to be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Smith?
Yes, just a couple of comments. I know some people, for example, we've had one very successful business. It was a pierogi place down on the main beach, and they had to close because they couldn't get staff. And you wonder when you see these businesses going out of business if it's because of lack of staff. And, you know, of course, the perception is, oh, they didn't make it. You know, it's always negative. And the real reason for them leaving isn't the fact that there's no business. They can't get staff. The other thing I would like to see, and I don't know how you work on this, but the youth and you know, it's a culture right now. They don't want those jobs. They're above that. When they come out of university, they want to be president of a company, you know. So getting to the youth, I mean, they could probably make enough money in the summer to pay for the university, but they don't want to work at some of the mom and pop shops, and they don't want to work at McDonald's and some of the ones that are doing well. And I didn't see in your strategy anywhere to address this, and I think it's very important. I mean, I see on McDonald's commercials, there's people that are saying how well they're paid, and you know, they let them go to university, etc. And I don't see a program to encourage you to take those jobs.
Through the chair, really great question. When we started our task force work, one of our pillars was in fact engaging with youth and engaging at the secondary school level. When we started to get more data, however, what we found was that youth are actually youth in our region are participating more in the workforce than the provincial average. So we are actually quite tapped out of the youth market, in fact. So I would say there is a cohort there that is probably very representative of what you were describing, but statistically speaking, we are performing much higher than the province in terms of youth engagement in the workforce. What we've recognized is that our path to growth for recruitment has to be out of market. So we underneath these pillars, we do have a youth strategy. We have been engaging with the schools. We're hosting a local high school forum. It's just not percolated to the top because there's a smaller opportunity there. I still agree that one exists, and it was funny because we had that same initial perspective as a task force until we started to collect the data and we realized, oh, we've got the youth. We have seniors who want to work. The problem is that the labor market with such dramatic drops means there's just not enough people. So it has to be an out recruitment, thus the challenge on housing, transit, and other supports. It's really hard to recruit someone away.
Okay, we're going to take one more question. I'm going to do a closing comment. I just would say that this is important enough for our region is that, you know, we might want an ongoing update at future meetings because it is so important to our area. Councillor Gray?
Thank you. Just a comment. I think that the employment needs have changed, or not the employment needs, but the employees' needs have changed. I'm seeing more of a demand for part-time work. So, and this is coming from 30-year-olds, people with young families who are suddenly trying to balance. They don't want to work the 40, 50, 60 hours. You know, we worked when we were raising our families and climbing the corporate ladder. They're looking to balance their family life, and they might only want 30 hours a week. And their wife might, husband, wife might work 30, but they want to balance their child care. And so as an employer, where you used to have one full-time position, it might now be 3 part-time positions. So it's a little harder to manage as an employer.
For sure.
Because you've got certainly more traffic and more expenses. But it's not just the youth. I think there's a lot of people out there, but their needs are a lot different than they used to.
It's through the chair. It's become more complex than it ever has. But it doesn't mean we won't address it. We will.
I'm just going to wrap up by saying that we often talk about tourism, and sometimes our residents feel that there's too much focus on tourism versus residents. But you hit on some very interesting points about trickle-down effect, and that this is the shortages go far beyond tourism. Like, I mean, because tourism is competing with every other business. So when you go to the grocery store or whatever, the level of services you're getting are impacted. But when you start talking about vineyards and apple orchards, because they're all feeding product into the system, the more guests we have, the more we consume, the more economic benefit we derive for our area. So yes.
Apologies for interrupting. May I make one more point that I neglected to make?
Okay, but the CAO might hit me, but if you can do it in 10 seconds.
You can hit me instead. Just a point, the data shows that these shortages are equally prevalent in tourism and other sectors, manufacturing, agriculture, and others. So just so everyone's aware. But thank you.
Thank you, and I think our CEO wanted a comment. I thought he was telling me 1 minute, but.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, and Andrew just made the point I was going to make, is that the labor shortage applies to other sectors as well, and as a municipality, we're feeling the pinch. And last year, for the summer of 2017, we had challenge of recruiting staff. We were not able to recruit all the staff we needed, and we're in a competitive market with other sectors. So, Andrew, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure on behalf of the tourism sector to lead this important initiative, and we think it's our obligation as leaders of the community.
And I want to tell you, you were just as passionate as the people that were presented about waste earlier, and we can relate a little better to this one. So thank you very much.
Thank you all.
And please come back and give us an update.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next, we have one more presentation for today, and Miss Beatrice Patuko will be in attendance. She's here, and will talk to us about the Wasaga Art Society and I guess in general some arts and culture initiatives. So. Joe. Thank you.
Morning. Thank you, Mayor Smith, Deputy Mayor Fulci. Thank you for allowing me a few minutes to talk a little bit about Wasaga Beach. My name is Beatrice Kitoko. I'm actually a recent transplant to Wasaga. I've owned real estate here for many years, but just recently moved full-time to the beach. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about arts and culture and how it impacts communities. So there's a screen up, and it's an image in my travels, in my presentations. I usually start with a very brief story, and it was about an anthropologist who went to a community in Africa, and he wanted to play a game with the children. So he put a basket of fruit near a tree, and he told the children to, whoever runs to the tree first will get the basket of fruit. And so he, said 1, 2, go, and he was a little bit surprised by what happened next. The children grabbed each other's hands, they walked to the tree, and they shared the fruit. And he was perplexed by this, so he asked the children, why did you do that? And the children responded, if one of us is sad, how can anyone be happy? And what it spoke to, really was the power of community. There's all sorts of differing opinions about, Wasaga Beach, and the bottom line is I think everybody has a common interest in seeing progress. And one of the ways in which progress happens is through art and through, developing a different perception of what, the community currently displays, in the public. So I wanted to, before coming to Wasaga Beach, I actually spent some time in Texas. I was doing some consulting in Texas, and in Dallas, there's a community called Deep Ellum. Deep Ellum has a bit of a similar history to Wasaga in the fact that, they were slightly depressed in terms of, certain situations that had happened within their community, and they didn't have a lot of people coming to the community. They just didn't have any businesses. It was one of those situations where, they were struggling. In any event, what they did do is they introduced art to the community, and amazing things happened. So I actually went ahead and I connected with Deep Ellum to discern whether or not they'd have any interest in becoming a twin town or a sister city. And I actually received word from them, they met on the 10th of April, that they are interested. And I want to show you a few slides that I presented. These are some of my images. I'm not an artist, I'm a bit of a photographer. So I took these at the beach, and the idea is essentially to find a town or a community that we can emulate. So I gave them a little bit of information with regards to Wasaga, and obviously Deep Ellum is similar into the fact that there was a time when their community was struggling to bring people in. So those are the commonalities. We talked a little bit about the fact that Deep Ellum in the early 2000s had a very high crime rate. In Wasaga Beach, since 2007, with particularly the fire that destroyed the main tourist area, or Beach 1, has seen a bit of a decline in our tourism. With that in mind, I just kind of want to go through Deep Ellum. I had requested if we could have them become a town that mentors us, or a twin town. Now, one of the reasons I chose Deep Ellum was twofold. Essentially, they have an incredible array of art. It's graffiti art, so it's very well done. They bring artists from different areas to actually paint different murals across the city. And aside from the fact that they have these art murals, what they've done is they've created this really cool community of different programs, of which we can emulate. So for example, they have an arts festival, an outdoor market, bike-friendly event. They do light pole banners, and they actually have an urban garden, which is in the middle of their town, and anyone can go and plant vegetables, and it's a community, garden. The nice thing about actually having a town that we can emulate essentially gives us access to, the marketing that they've implemented. So, it saves us costs because we can actually take their logos, and all of the hard work that they've done and emulate it. So by way of example, if we wanted to do the Wasaga Outdoor Market, we could use that logo to market it. They are interested in mentoring us, and they are interested in becoming a twin town. I wanted to show, this is Deep Ellum. So these images kind of give you a sense of the kind of murals. Now the interesting thing also is that, in an age of social media, what ends up happening in Deep Ellum ultimately is that people will travel there to take pictures in front of these incredible murals, and what they'll end up doing is they'll end up hashtagging or linking Deep Ellum, which creates organic buzz. It creates people wanting to come to see this artwork. So what I've gone ahead and I've done, I don't have internet access, but you can certainly go to Wasaga Art Society. And on that webpage, I've taken some pictures of primarily town-owned real estate. The ask here essentially is if the town would allow and agree to use some of the real estate that is owned to have wall murals painted on the properties that are listed, and others. I've reached out to some other individual property owners in the community who are all eager to do this and willing to use some of their property for murals. So it would create a different vibe, a different look. Now I just want to bring up one other slide. If I can get the mouse to cooperate. This is an international This is an international festival that's held in Montreal. It happens every year, and this is the goal, essentially, is that if we could turn this idea into an annual festival, there's an opportunity to bring a lot of people to the town, and not only that, but a lot of media attention. Now, if the town agrees to have the artwork or the property that's owned by the town have wall murals on it, the goal essentially is not only to bring in artists from outside of Wasaga. We have a plethora of incredible artists that are here in town. So the goal is to have 50% of the artists be from Wasaga and then go outside of Wasaga. And the reason to go outside essentially is to bring in and draw attention to the town. So, if we're going to Toronto or if we're going to Montreal to look for artists, certainly we would get the opportunity to promote it and to offer press releases to other municipalities that would have interest, and again, bring some interest. I want to just go through this because this festival is incredible. It's about 5 years old. It actually brings in artists from around the world. So, and this is some of the images that are painted. There are, opportunities. People have, created walking tours of this, and this gives you a sense of, it could turn into an area where the town could create some sort of revenue from it. But ultimately, you can see that, obviously 86% of, the visitors are obviously from Montreal. But you also have almost 5% of visitors coming from other countries, almost 5% coming from the United States. So certainly you get a lot of traffic. And again, this is just to give you a sense of the type of graffiti art that we're talking about. It would give, the town of Wasaga Beach a little bit of a different appeal, a little bit of a different look. Just to give you another sort of idea, in terms of the community itself, they have 142,000 subscribers to Instagram, 33,000 subscribers to Facebook, and you've got 81,000 unique monthly visitors to their website. That's impressive numbers. So people are actually traveling to go and, take a look at this. And I wanted to pull this one up because this gives you a sense of the kind of media presence that they've had since the inception of this festival. You've got a lot of different publicity coming to the town or the city of Montreal. But here's where I really wanted to kind of go through is, I believe there's some images. Oh, no, there's not. Well, you can certainly look at Mural or Google Mural Montreal, and there's a whole wide range of images that gives you a sense of the type of artwork. So ultimately it was a bit of an introduction, but really the ask is if the town would agree to have some of the property that's owned by the town be beautified by windmills.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. I'll take questions or comments. Deputy Mayor first, I believe.
Thank you. I can read my scribbly notes here. Great presentation. I'm just curious what your role in this would be. I think I saw you here probably a month ago at a ribbon cutting, and then I think you met with Councillor Boulanger. So I'm just curious, have you spoken to staff about this as well? When you say you're a recent transport to Wasaga Beach, is this a new business for you? Are you still, I believe you're also a mortgage broker, looking after commercial, residential, bad credit that people can't get financing. So are you looking to work with property owners to pay, who's paying for it? What's your role?
So my role essentially is just putting it together. Ultimately I'm not in this to make any money. My goal is just to see something positive happen within the community. My role essentially would be to organize and find people who want to participate. A part of what I do outside of mortgage brokering is branding, public relations, so I would be able to actually go after some PR, some press, some media, and ultimately just create this festival. Down the road, if there's an opportunity to create this as an annual festival, there's always an opportunity to create revenue, and depends on whether the town wants to be involved or if there's an opportunity for me to continue to grow the festival as a business. Certainly there'd be some interest, but if we were able to do this year, it's way too soon for us to bring in any sponsors, unless Mural, who I have contacted, would want to link up and have a second mural festival in the town of Wasaga. I haven't heard back from them, but there is that possibility, which would be incredible, because then they would come in and sort of overtake that and use the town as their secondary option.
Okay, and so you haven't spoke to our events department?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few comments, if you indulge me. I believe that the Twin City aspect should be separate from this project. We have, I think there's a lot of discussion to be had on the Twin City and where they're located and where are people going for the winter. I mean, a lot of people go to Puerto Vallarta, Canadians more and more. And, from a tourism point of view, I don't know if it makes sense. And I think it requires further discussion not to take away from what you're proposing with the art, but I think they are two separate issues from a twinning city. I was involved with Mississauga when they did a lot of 22. So anyway, I think that's a separate discussion, if I may, Mr. Chair. The other thing I wanted to ask you is the costs. Do these artists get paid to come and do these murals?
The goal is not to pay the artists to do the murals.
Okay.
It's to give them an opportunity, which ties in with public relations. So if we were able to connect with different media and PR, it would give them an opportunity to showcase their art in a grand way. So we would not pay the artists. We would ask them to send in ideas. And that's one other point to make, is that it's not just a blank slate. They would have to propose what they wanted to paint so that we're in agreement. But that would be the goal.
Okay, and thank you. One further question, if you would allow me. The South Beach building has that beer commercial on the wall. What is the status of that? Is that ours? We could paint over it? Who? Is somebody getting money from the beer company for that big mural? Because to me, I think that's the type of thing we're trying not to have down there for now. And I just wondered if that would be a possibility, is that wall on the Copa, the old Copa, South Beach. Is the town making money for advertising on that? Or what, maybe the CAO could enlighten me?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I can enlighten the councillor though. That's an arrangement between the tenant and the beer company for that. So the town did approve the actual painting of the mural, but the arrangement for any transfer of funds or anything is with the tenant for that business, because they're Labatt's bar.
Yeah, I don't recall voting on that. Or it must be the beach management committee. I don't know. It didn't come to council. I think it's a big eyesore, and that would be my first project. Would be to paint a proper mural on that wall. They're only renting the inside. They aren't renting the outside of the building, and it should be our call. And that's something maybe the beach management board needs to pick up. But I think that's the type of thing we're trying to get rid of, is that gaudy advertising. Same as Bob the Dart. We've always had a sign with Budweiser instead of the Dart across the top, and I know it's money. So
I think that's a separate discussion as well. I think that mural was about $20,000, and I disagree. I feel it's quite a very attractive mural, and I don't think we would be painting over a $20,000 mural anytime soon. But that's a decision that council could bring forward and deal with at another time.
Sorry, I just wanted to respond, Councillor Smith, with regards to the Twinning City. There is another city that has had interest with another resident that's approached. I believe it's Fort Myers in Florida, and they are also interested. The town of Deep Ellum is much more interested in a mentoring program where we can actually take a look at what they've done to sort of bring their town back up and use some of the, as mentioned, their branding and the festivals. So just to put it into context, it doesn't necessarily have to be a twin town to Deep Ellum, but Deep Ellum, and certainly if you take a look at their some of the marketing that they do around the town, it's quite impressive, and it's brought back a lot of microbreweries, a lot of businesses. So it's just to make a point of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you, Beatrice, for your presentation. It's a great presentation. It's great to see, even though you're a new resident, if I understand you correctly, to Wasaga Beach, that you're taking such interest in our community, and I think we're seeing that more and more every day, Mr. Chair. I think I really like this mural idea. I think that you're seeing it more and more in more and more communities, and some beautiful murals. Midland is a prime example of that on the side of the old grain elevator. That mural that was done several years ago, but it's just it's a beautiful mural, and you're seeing them all over the place. And we no doubt have a lot of canvas, if you will, throughout the town that we own, that we could do something. Councillor Smith had asked the question, can they paint whatever they want, and you said no, we'd ask them for their ideas, but is this something we could also give them an idea of something we'd like to see, and then they could submit something along that line?
Certainly, and I think it's an opportunity for the town also to sort of decide, do we want to promote the past? Wasaga Beach has a very rich history, and perhaps, we paint a picture or a mural, of old time Wasaga, and new time Wasaga, and so it gives us an opportunity, or the town an opportunity to really determine what how they'd like to see the town. Ultimately, I think what we want to achieve is an area that people want to come to and take pictures of pictures. That seems to be a popular thing lately, and hashtag and organically market the town as we continue with different ideas of redevelopment.
So I guess the point I'm going to make then, Mr. Chair, is that this is the type of thing that I believe council should be embracing, our community should be embracing. We should be always looking to make our community better, to move forward, to create, and to think, quite frankly, outside the box, if you will, in order to make a more pleasant space for our residents and a pleasant space for tourists. And I think that we shouldn't be doing anything to prevent this from happening. We do have a very rich arts and culture group of folks in this community that is just, again, before I became mayor, I was aware we had some artists, but not even close to the amount that we do have and the amazing work that they can do. And so I think we should be promoting this and working with citizens who want to help us to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, if there's no further comments, I just would like again to say that it was an excellent presentation. I go back to one of our first public engagement meetings where our community said the number one thing that they wanted more of in our community is arts and culture. And this can really distinct. I go one step forward. I think we can be an arts and culture mecca. I think the music scene usually follows suit with that. That ties in very nicely with all the festivals and events we try to create. Immediately, I had some concern, thinking about it related to, artists doing it for free. And certainly, we can look at private funding. We can look at contests. We can look at a lot of things that, over and above the publicity, we might get a lot more interest if we had some type of incentive. Matter of fact, I had on another project, I had talked to Doug Vincent about if we had sponsorship of art, what would be available as far as passing bylaw to have the sponsor indicated on the piece of art. And he indicated that if it was tastefully done in basically a 2 by 2 foot square on a mural someplace where we indicated sponsored by a particular business, that would certainly be consistent with our bylaws. So there's certainly some opportunities to move this forward. And I immediately think when we talk about reaching outside is, as you see, Montreal has a huge art scene, and I hear numbers as high as 30-40% of our guests are coming from Quebec in the summer right now. Certainly if some of those artists were encouraged to participate and would participate, I think that would be even a huge draw for more French Canadians to visit our town every summer. So thanks again, Councillor Stockwell.
Mr. Chair, it is an interesting proposal. My concern is that usually the next step in the process would be for this committee to refer it to staff for a review or report. That concerns me. I think our staff has enough on their plate right now. In fact, we have projects that we're having trouble getting off and getting running because of the need of staff time. So if it's an outside group that comes along and says, we're going to look after this thing, but to get it involved with municipal staff, it's something that I just don't think we can do.
Thank you. I think to that point, though, I think if we have any group doing anything in town, the process is to go through staff, and staff brings it to this table. So whether staff is busy or not, I think it definitely has to go through that process and come back to the table for council to make some decisions.
Mr. Chairman, that's clearly my point. It has to go to staff.
Oh, okay, I misunderstood.
And I'm saying, don't do it. Staff's got enough on their plate right now.
All right, I misunderstood.
Okay, again, I would, I don't know where we go from here either. I would certainly agree with the mayor. This is something moves forward. There's, I think you had mentioned there's some private properties that are involved, and certainly, I guess as long as we're in line with the bylaws, that's not necessarily to even take it to council. But with that said, we, there's a concentration around Playland Park that is actually unsightly, and for us to move forward, it would be a case of artists submitting what they would like to put on a particular place, and that either through a committee or some other thing, we say, yeah, let's go ahead. If you don't like it, you can paint over it like it. But I don't think this has to be any work for staff. I think this could be very streamlined and operate very much outside of.
What motion do you have, Mr. Chair?
Well, I would basically, I'd like to put forth a motion that we go to the next step and have it at the earliest possible convenience brought back to this table with a little more detail. Maybe Beatrice, would you be interested in doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. And just one other last point is the goal essentially is that if approvals were allowed, this is not something that the town has to be involved with, or they can be involved as much as they'd like. Ultimately, it's just a matter of approval, and then we would certainly involve the town as need be. The goal right now is, if we did have approvals, is to begin marketing this so that we could bring artists in to have the murals completed for July 1st, which brings in a lot of tourists and would give us an opportunity to have a lot of social media tagging, hopefully bring a lot of people back.
Okay, I think Mayor Smith and then Councillor Smith and then Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I look at this as one of those things that we can complicate it as much as we want, Mr. Chair, and Lord knows we're good at it. But at the end of the day, I think we're looking at, council, agreeing or disagreeing whether or not we want to allow whatever the proposed canvases are around town, and which ones, or all of them. So that's the first step. I think that should be fairly simple to get through. And then the next step is, I think council needs to decide what type or what kind of theme, if you will, for lack of a better term, that we'd like to see. And then, of course, allow Beatrice and her group to go out and do what they're going to do, and to come back to us then to say, yeah, we've got 1 artist, 10 artists, whatever it might be, and based on your theme, here's the thoughts of what they would do, and council looks at it. If we like those murals, those drafts, I guess, we say yes, and if we don't, we say no. Take it back to the drawing board or whatever. And for this year, we might only get 1 done, and we might get 10 done. We don't know, but I think giving them the canvas that has to be done. I'm going to look to the CAO. I don't know. I don't see a lot of work here for staff to have to do if we go along that premise. Of course, council is always going to make the final approval and have the final say, so nothing's going to happen without us allowing it to happen. But I don't see a lot of work here for staff. Mr. CAO, do you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I think in terms of the review, in terms of what's being proposed, I don't see a lot of work in terms of sitting down with Beatrice saying, okay, let's flesh this out, how would it work, that kind of thing. I don't see a lot of work, but I think that's an important step. After that, then, if it's going to be organized and administered by that third party, I'll call Beatrice's group a third party, then it's not a lot of work from staff. But if it's going to be administered by the town, then it's additional work, and that's to Councillor Stockwell's point. But I think that initially, just having a look, understanding more clearly what it is, what part of town are we looking at, the whole thing, some of those details. I think that would be a good first step, and I don't think that would be a lot of work. And then bring it back with details in terms of how it works, so that everybody's on the same page with respect to an understanding. Everybody's role is clear, what Beatrice is doing, what the town is doing, what the private sector is doing, and then we can move forward.
So So, and my point then, thank you, Mr. CAO, my point is, let's not stop this here and forget about it, or not come back, or be on, as unfinished business for months and months and months. Let's keep this ball rolling, let's keep kicking this can down the road until we get to a point, as quickly as we can, that we can see something happen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I just have one comment, and Johanna's here, is we do have a tourism advisory committee that looks after product development and marketing, and at some point we're going to have to rely on that committee or Johanna in her role as economic development officer to do the marketing of all of this as well. So I would be, I would, not to disrespect, but maybe the committee needs to work with one of the other committees if we're going to go with the historic thing, the historical committee. I'm just thinking that, you know, in product development, and I'm thinking broader, and Johanna will understand where I'm coming from. Meaford has beautiful and Thornbury does, and so does Collingwood and Midland. You know, you go around the bay and there are a lot, and you know, maybe it's product development with RT07 or something that we have a tour of, you know, available down the road. But I think the tourism committee needs to be not part of her managing it, but she needs to report to somebody as she goes. So that's, you know, it's just what falls within the framework of the tourism advisory committee.
I think Beatrice would like to respond to that.
Just have a quick comment. I mean, I'm happy to work with the town or not work with the town, whatever makes it easier. Okay. I mean, art is, in my opinion, very neutral. I think it draws people in, and it can be very subjective, and it's nice to have, and it can do something that has very low cost to the town and gets people excited. Yeah. With that in mind, as mentioned, I'm happy to work with Johanna and to work with the town, or not. If the town is too busy, certainly I have, you know, the wherewithal to administer this myself with town involvement. Mm-hmm. But again, I don't want to make this complicated, or you know, and I don't have any, you know, self-interest. This really is about making the town, you know, something better to come to this summer.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I think part of the problem is, like, it's great ideas, but it came to, I guess, a surprise to many of us at the table. Some of you around the table have maybe been part of meetings with Beatrice already, and the rest of us have not. So it's a new thing coming towards us, and I think we need to have all those other details before, as a council, we can say we agree with it or not. If there is any payment or cost or anything involved, we do have policies, and so that's why I'm saying I think staff need to get back to us on it, and just to clarify, we're a municipality, and we need to make sure we're following rules with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to the mayor's point, I think it can be done very simply. I was involved in a previous life with a mural project, and where it was entirely driven by the private sector. The muralist dealt with the building owner, asked for approval to paint a mural. The building owner paid for the paint because it requires special paint, special preparation, and it was an arrangement between the muralist and the business owner. And the mural was connected with the business, so it may have been a family history that was depicted. It may have been the way the building looked when it was first built. If you go into Penetanguishene or Midland, you can see examples of those murals that have been painted through a very simple process of the muralist working with the business owner. The municipality, in my case, was not involved to any degree, or a very minimal degree. So it can be done very simply, or it can be done in a more elaborate way. My point is that, you know, if we refer it back to staff can look at that, come back and say maybe it's something that third party, it's organized, and all the town does is maybe look at its bylaws to make sure that whatever's being done is in conforming to the bylaws, make any adjustments that need to be made, and go do your thing, you know, type thing. So, thank you.
Beatrice, if you'd like to respond.
And I agree with that completely. The only question here is a lot of the areas are owned by the town, so a lot of the properties, and so realistically we would, the ask is of the property owners, which happens to be the town.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that, if I may, Mr. Chair, I think that would be part of it, is to say, okay, these buildings, if you could find a muralist and it's these theme, then go ahead.
Okay.
And
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. CEO. Again, you can drive around Midland and Penetang. Bourgeois Motors, their old building before they moved, is a prime example of this. A beautiful mural of their family, the father, the son, the owners of the business in there. I don't think we have any bylaws, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in Wasaga Beach that says a property owner wants to paint a nice mural on their wall that says they can't do that. I don't recall any bylaws with respect to that, as long as it's not a sign. So if it's a mural similar to this, it's not a sign, then so be it. And of course we can complicate that. God knows we can complicate that, Mr. Chair. We could say, oh no, if it has a picture of a car and you sell cars, now it's a sign. But I really struggle when I hear we are too busy to make our community better. We should never be too busy to make our community better. It's why we were elected, Mr. Chair. It's why we have the staff we have. And so let's not complicate this. Let's let Beatrice and her group work with the staff. They'll come back to council. Again, let's make it perfectly clear, nothing's going to happen. No money is ever going to be spent without us approving it, unless it's already in a budget that has already been approved for this type of situation. Let's not bog this down for months and months like we do with many things, Mr. Chair, and let's move something this simple ahead and make our community more beautiful.
With that said, a motion has been prepared, and given that economic development was involved and tourism was involved with the last art installations, and I would hopefully that we'd be able to do this with very little time. Resolve that coordinate. Oh, I need a first and second. So I'll read the motion, then we'll need a first and second. Resolve that coordinated committee recommends that item 6.1b be referred back to Economic Development and Tourism Department for further review and recommendation to committee at a future meeting. Okay, so it's Mayor Smith and Councillor Smith.
Very selective comments being allowed at the table.
Thank you.
Okay, so I've already read the motion, so okay, moved by Mayor Smith, or
Me.
Councillor Smith, and seconded by Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Bray.
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Byfolchi.
In favor?
Councillor Smith.
In favor.
Mayor Smith.
In favor.
Councillor Stockwell.
Opposed.
Chair Belanger.
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 5 in favor and 1 opposed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Okay, so now we move to consent agenda. Okay, I'm going to move to the consent agenda. There has been one item pulled, and that's the Director of Economic Development and Tourism report dated April 12, 2018, March activity update. So that will be pulled for separate vote. So moved by Councillor Bray and seconded by Deputy Mayor Byfolchi. Resolve that General Government section of Coordinated Committee hereby receives the April 12, 2018 consent agenda items 6.4.1 through 6.4.3, and that the recommendations contained therein be adopted as amended.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Regarding unfinished business, I just wanted to discuss that before we go with regards to the Historical Advisory Committee. Now that it is in council's hands, I'm just recommending this be removed from the unfinished business line item.
Okay, thank you. Comment on that?
The Historical Advisory Committee isn't involved anymore, so.
Well, item A.
Yeah. I finished
6.2A.
this. Yeah, 6.2A.
So where does this stand? Where does this stand?
It's with council now, so that it doesn't
Go
need
ahead,
to come
Andre.
forward
It's with council.
from the committee. Yeah.
Thank you. Just to provide some follow-up to this. So there was the report that was done based on the Historical Advisory Committee, and at council gave direction to staff to bring forward a further report. So that's why it's shown on here. So that further report will be coming forward. We were waiting on some additional information from a consultant to help us with that process because we didn't have that staffing knowledge in-house or expertise. So I received it, I believe, yesterday, the memo, the final memo from the consultant. So that will be included in the report to follow up to this request, just for clarification.
So it's not before us today.
No.
Thank you.
Can we read that or we have
Nope. Okay. So having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Brady?
In favor?
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Bicolci?
In favor.
Councillor Smith?
In favor.
Mayor Smith?
In favor?
Councillor Stockwell?
In favor.
Chair Boulanger?
in favor?
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 6 in favor and 0 opposed.
Okay, so the item, Paul, that was from Councillor Bray.
Taking through you, I had one question and one comment. The question was to do with the Community Improvement Plan, the CIP. I guess the date for the mediation period was April 10th, and I just wondered if you had an anticipated number of appeals going forward.
Through the chair, yes, the mediation period ends April 10th, and
Excuse me, in the audience, could you, thank you.
I'll have to confirm with Nathan. We had requested to be notified by 3 applicants whether they are or not they still wanted to proceed. They appear to be on the fence. To my knowledge, we have not received notice that they're going to withdraw yet, but I need to confirm that.
Thank you. And then I had a comment about the home-based business guide. I guess our economic development is working with the Center for Business to develop a home-based business guide, which I think is great. It's a step in the right direction. I know many of the home-based businesses that I have worked with have real concerns about the signage and our bylaws that don't allow them to have any signage. I think if we're going to work to create a guide that says, hey, we want to help you grow your business through your home, then we maybe need to look at that, whether it's a 2x2 or 1x1. I just think to say you can run a business from your home, but you can't actually put your name on the door is a little bit of it's a struggle for some of those home businesses. So it doesn't need to be big, but I think that they should be allowed to have something.
Go ahead, Joanna.
Mr. Chair. We are looking to clarify that with the bylaw department. My understanding is there is a permission for a sign by the door, but it is a rather small sign. But we are getting verification from our bylaw department to make sure that the information in the guide is accessible to the public and that it is clear on what signage is allowed. My understanding is that bylaw is taking a look through all of their bylaws associated with the business community, and I certainly hope to consult with them on that.
Yes, Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Just a comment. I would hope that the business guide is only for licensed businesses in town and not just anybody that feels like they want to run something from their basement.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The purpose of the home-based business guide is to help the public understand what's involved in establishing a home-based business. So included in that is the need to be licensed. Okay. So it specifies that as well.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no further comment, I think that you call the next date, or do I do that? Oh, sorry, my apologies. Yes, so moved by Councillor Smith and seconded by Councillor Bray. Resolved that the General Government Service Section Coordinating Committee received the monthly March 2018 update report from the Economic Development and Tourism Department for information.
Thank you. Having heard the question, I'll call for the vote. Councillor Bray?
In favor?
Deputy Mayor Bicolci?
In favor?
Councillor Smith?
In favor.
Mayor Smith?
In favor?
Councillor Stockwell?
In favor.
Chair Boulanger?
In favor?
Thank you. The motion carries on a vote of 6 in favor, 0 opposed.
Okay, other matters we have none. Date of the next meeting is May 17th, 2018. No closed session, no reports from closed session, so meeting's adjourned.